On stage with me is Daniel MacLaughlin, one of our friends from down under, our Jamf BSCs from Australia, and Danny's going to take us off. We also have Bryson coming up a little bit, but please welcome Daniel.
Thank you. Thank you, John. So yes, as he mentioned, I've come up from Sydney, so all of the faults are going to be because of jet lag. Because it's 6:45 tomorrow morning where I am, so I time traveled a lot to get here. So I should put onto that there. So as I said, Daniel MacLaughlin, Pro Server engineer, and Bryson will come up. I think show of hands who doesn't know who Bryson is. Yeah, exactly. So just going to cover the agenda a little bit for what we're going to talk about. So who is here for sort of part one? Yeah, cool. Part two? Yeah, we're ready for the trilogy? We're going to make it to Mordor? No. So I'm just going to do like a little bit of refresher. I'm not going to spend too long on what it looks like, just for anyone who's new in the room. I'm going to talk about Bryson's favorite subject of PHP and integrating with sort of database types. And then Bryson's going to come up and blow us all away with using ADOS and serverless functions and all this kind of cool stuff. So first things first, what does a webhook look like? Because we've heard about them throughout the day and yesterday as well, and they're really cool technology, but it's nice to actually see like a visual representation of what it is. So we cast back way back 2 years ago when we were in open book. I think it was an open book. So part of the Guthrie, traipse all over there, walk past Grumpy's, get the flashbacks. Too soon, yeah, I heard. So I've got here just a short sort of live capture of me sending a mobile device command, and the screen on the right is a really useful webhook tester. It's called webhook.site. You can go up, it's free. It's an open source project. You can sort of fork it yourself and play around with it. HTTPS, you can send XML or JSON to it. You can put auth into it if you want to. It's up to you. So you go to that site, it will generate a new one. You can see that in the top right-hand corner. You put that into the Jamf server, put your record, and away you go. So I've already done that, and so I'm just going to hit a command here. If it plays, yep, update inventory. We can see on the right-hand side, waiting for the request. This was the server mine, and there it is. All right, I was sending JSON data. That's what it is there. You can see all the structure of the data, and then you can, strip it out, find what information is there. Really useful for testing if you're trying to use another webhook to a piece of information and you're getting empty results. Maybe point it to here first and see, was there anything in there to begin with? So I found this was really helpful for putting it out. Anyone remember that from part one? Seems like only yesterday. So I'm going to move on to using PHP and databases. So I've put some code up on here. This is just a PHP code snippet. I'll put it up for a second there for anyone. The links are the same, just the shortened link is the Jamf IT one for anyone who wants to type it. Otherwise, it's on my GitHub. I take no responsibility if you break your system with it. I got that. See a couple other cameras up there. I'll give another few seconds. Cool. So while I was looking at PHP and databases, and why I was sort of doing this. So not everything has an API, but a lot of things have like a database backend. And database comes in all flavors, like penny candy or radiation. So many variations. You can choose which one you prefer. And so I was looking on this because you might remember from part two, Oliver did an awesome presentation part with PHP where he had a big school district. We needed to get an LDAP attribute that was being submitted as part of their auth, fired off there to move them into a site and move them back. And that was great. And it built a lot of the foundation for me. But I had a customer in Asia that had about 100,000 devices. They were mixed. Apple TVs, Macs, iOS. They didn't have LDAP. And LDAP doesn't work for Apple TV anyway. Sorry. What they did have, amazingly, was a CSV. Yeah. Thank God I did not have to make that CSV. But 100,000 rows in a CSV, I cringed, and I was trying to cycle it through, and no, can we put in something where we have to query it a bit? I'm comfortable with MySQL, with my Jamf background, so yep, put it into MySQL. And so they're like, okay, well, how do I dump it into MySQL? And that led me back to PHP, because PHP has over 20 different native integrations with databases. MySQL, LDAP, Microsoft SQL, PostgreSQL. I won't name them all. You can Google them yourself. So that's where I was sort of like, okay, if I can put into here, I can provide an interface on that. And because I'm more of a bash scripter, whereas Bryson's very much, I believe you know Python. A little bit. So I was very much more comfortable with bash scripting, and I found it very similar with PHP scripting. That might be just the way my brain has been altered over the years to just work that out. But that made sense to me. So, okay, if I can put a CSV into a database, I can put a PHP front end, I can query that, and I can have the integration native to talk to it. And then everything else that Oliver sort of, well, not everything else, but a lot of the stuff that Oliver presented last year was like, great, I can sort of steal that and make it look like I know what I'm doing. So I'll give you some snippets here of how like PHP can be that simple to talk to different databases. And they're very short. Like it's a, and if you're a bash scripter, shell scripter, you can sort of see the logic behind it is very similar. You can see here, like, you define your variables, LDAP host, LDAP port, and then you just have a variable where you link the two together. Or die, which I think is a little, better terminology maybe, but that's it. Like, I couldn't connect to it, kill the connection. All right? So LDAP. Now, we already integrate with LDAP really well, so I never really thought about using that. But while you can sort of read, it's interacting with the database. You could post. I was looking at some other option for like LDAP where if you're doing LAPS, local admin password sync type thing for machines, we got that randomization. There was a great talk at Penn State. I was like, well, could I write out to a record if I have like a PHP front end rather than having to be bound? Never got really around to that. So hopefully someone else can pick up on that one. Another option, Microsoft Server, Microsoft SQL. Sorry. Well, slightly different variables on that one where you have to define your server and your specific instance, because that's just the way Microsoft SQL is configured. Your username and your password. You link those together. Die. This one I put like a little bit of sample, like an actual, reasonable error message. Something went wrong. PostgreSQL. Again, we can see it's pretty straightforward. These are all native. I didn't have to add anything into it. You can see like this one, it's got like PG Connect is down the bottom there. That's just the native thing that PHP has. And the last one, which I did use a lot, was MySQL. Which, yeah, localhost, root, very secure password. I really hope no one's ever used that in production. I am, yeah. And yeah, the MySQL I connection where grouping all this together so that variable MySQL dbcon, I can then just actually use that as a variable. So I can say, okay, MySQL dbcon brackets and my MySQL command, like select or delete. Drop the tables, drop the database. So let's have sort of like a little bit of workflow with that, where I've got my sort of MySQL sort of type database where I've uploaded my data. So on the left, I've got my Jamf server. PHP is like it's a webhook receiver, and at the same time, it's also the database communicator. So it's just acting as both. And because it's PHP, it could be listening on a Windows box, Linux box, anything that runs Apache, really. And then my lovely database on the right. So if we sort of put this in actuation, webhook event happens. Fires over to hit the receiver. Receiver then says, OK, there was a serial number maybe as part of that webhook event. Fires that, looks into the database. Gets a result. Fires that back into the PHP. Now, the result might be in a different format than what Jamf is expecting. So then the PHP aspect is like, OK, I'll grab this data back from my search results, format it back into the correct format. In this case, I'm talking back to the classic API, so it's going to be an XML, because I'm posting. And that sends it back as the XML to the Jamf server. That's type of the example there. Now, when I first had to do this, this was about 4 or 5 months ago. And I showed us some dev, and we had the big customers like, well, you built this. What happens if you leave? Like, well, that's a bad time for you. I will take bribes. And it's like, no, so you may know about 10.8, where we've got the inventory preload. So you take that CSV and you upload it. I was like, great, cool. So I've already submitted my JNUC presentation, so thank you, but it's better for everyone. But then I thought, no, but there's other databases out there. And again, not everything has an API, not everything can talk to everything properly. So the next example I'll show you is like a real-world example using a Snipe IT, which is an open, free asset database. Anyone in the room using it? Yeah, a couple. I like it, but it could do some more. And like I was like, how do I get the data out and syncing everything else? So for the camera as well, everyone put their hands up. It was actually 2. No. So in this situation here, I populated some fake data. And if I hit the play button here, so we should be able to see if I go up to, and I recorded this, so my timing is going to be a little bit off. But assets, I'll list all the assets here. There's my Mac. This will work for iOS as well. You see all this information here. I've got my status. I've got my serial number. That's how I'll link the data together. Got the warranty expiration as an actual date, as well as the purchase date. Jump into the Jamf server. You can see I have no information here. No devices enrolled. Maybe because of my procurement went through all this. So I go to my Webhook server, or Webhook auction, and you can see I've already populated the information in here. It's a bit hard to see on this screen, probably. It's grayed out. What I've also appended at the end of this, on my Webhook receiver, is a question mark Jamf URL. So if you ever like sort of searched anything, I've put authentication and stuff in there. If you ever like gone onto like a package tracking thing, it might direct you to another page where you got like question mark ID equals, and that's the search and tracking number you put in. Same sort of thing. So I can get rid of this, and I'm going to enroll this machine. Going to enroll. Okay, so I've done my MDM profile. Now, the Jamf binary isn't actually on the machine yet, though. Right, an inventory collection hasn't occurred. If I log back into the Jamf server, however, and we should see that some information will be there, but not all. Yep, still at the serial number, but all the information from the Snipe IT asset database is populated through. That's how quick the webhook firing, sending, and receiving can go through. All right, search again, we'll see, still hasn't happened, but it's matched all that same information in there. Now, you have to understand where your database is and how it structures stuff like that. For the Snipe IT, and that code snippet that I posted up was specifically for this result. The benefits on this as well, though, was because I put that question mark Jamf URL, I was reading that as part of it. So I could have a prod server and a dev server, both pointing to the same receiver, without needing to hard code a variable. Username and password, those were the API auth to feed back to the Jamf server. My receiver doesn't need auth, but the Jamf server does to submit data back. Now, rather than hard coding credentials, which you never should do, and I would be guilty of having to do that, but as a best case scenario, you would put those in there. And again, you might have different accounts for prod, dev. You might be an MSP and you have like 30 odd servers. You don't necessarily want to have 30 different webhook receivers. So I wanted to really make sure that this scaled properly. And then once it grabbed all this information from your asset data, whether it's like, status is pending diagnostics, you could change this from mobile device enrolled, because it works for mobile device as well. Instead of enrolled, you could say, okay, inventory update. So if a device has changed status in your inventory, or in your asset database, sorry, from maybe out for repair, maybe then you remove certain settings from it, or you lock it out, or if it's been flagged as lost or stolen, you can automate a command based on that. Remote wipe, remote lock. Or maybe it's a school and someone's taken it, you want to bring it back, and it's an iPad, so just set password requirement to be 64 characters. Change every day. It'll come back quick. That's a good way to get them into compliance anyway. So I'll give you the sort of the snippet of what that piece of PHP was. So that, as I mentioned, that question mark Jamf URL, that was a variable I put on there. So this is the PHP side of it. It's literally just a snippet of the full code there. Get Jamf URL, so that's going to get there. The webhook username and password is that PHP auth user and auth password. So that is what I'm using to authenticate back. And the actual PHP, that first thing we saw, that PHP / input, that's the first thing we saw on the webhook site, that webhook tester. It's basically just getting that, get file contents. Whatever hit it, it's just going to make it that. Nice and easy. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Bryson, who's just going to show me everything is better in Python.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you.
Test? Am I on? I don't hear myself. I hear myself now. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Return of the Jedi portion of the presentation. You started it. Yes. All right, so a lot of my focus over the last year and a half-ish has been actually on serverless development on our cloud engineering team, and that's leaked its way into pretty much everything I do now. So, but something a little different here. Who all was at Python night last night and listened to me ramble? Ooh, too many people. But so you saw a lot of code during that. You're not going to see any code this time. And yet we're going to be talking about a couple of core components about the serverless stack with AWS, and that's S3, which a lot of us are probably familiar with S3 if we have an AWS account because that's where you dump all your files when you're uploading them. Lambda and API Gateway. API Gateway providing you a site in order to actually expose endpoints to hit with requests. But instead of actually talking about how to build something with all these, AWS has something called the Serverless Application Repository. And this is something that they actually created so that developers who are building these little serverless microservices and applications could actually expose them and make them available for quick installs. So this is kind of cool, but something I noticed when I was browsing around it one day is that instead of actual complete services or applications, there were actually a whole lot of little components that were meant to be plugged together with other components in order to actually complete something. So basically, you browse the app repository and you find a whole bunch of pieces that you can cobble together in order to actually make something that does what you want to do. And I thought that was actually kind of a pretty cool idea. So I decided to take that idea and apply it to common patterns that you see in webhook-based integrations. Now, you've heard me talk about this a lot over the years, but like webhook-based integrations are really event-based integrations, whereas in the old days we had scripts that did polling processes. They were on a cron job and they just scraped through tons of results in order to find something to do, which is tedious, wasteful of resources, and not entirely instantaneous gratification on that. Event-based integrations, they act on a notification and then immediately go do what they're supposed to do. So I decided to take a look at some integrations that I've done before, like the Slack one and like the Slack integration and a few other things that I'd never actually released. And I took a look at like what are the common threads that they actually do, and I decided to break them apart. So here I have an example of like 3 components. You need a receiver. You need something to actually receive webhook events, but then that receiver, using AWS's stack, could actually then have other things bolted onto it in order to go perform actions. So like 2 other examples that came with was, the very common like, hey, I want just a quick integration that'll send notifications into a Slack channel. Or like Daniel's example, which has been, I worked on this and then they just put it into 10.8. But my populator concept, which, you throw a CSV file into S3, and then whenever an event comes in, it queries that file in S3 to find data and write it back to the JSS. Like, these were all common patterns. And the idea is, why would you want to have to spin up a whole application stack every single time you need to do something, when instead you could just pop into the serverless app repository and then quickly fire off a stack which has all the components needed to do whatever quick thing you wanted to get going? So the basic idea here is in Jamf Pro, you set up a webhook that would point to whatever the URL of your receiver is, and then you attach other components onto the receiver to do the actions that you want to have happen in response to whatever webhooks are going to it. In this case, fired off a webhook receiver, add a Slack notification to it, so now whenever events come in from Jamf Pro, they go into whatever Slack channel I set up for that notification plugin. But, because of the way that it's designed, that webhook receiver does a fan out. Whenever an event comes in, it actually publishes it to what's called an SNS topic. In AWS, an SNS topic is really just a notification pipeline, and you can attach a bunch of things to be receivers to it. So instead of a one-to-one relationship, it's a one-to-many relationship. So a whole bunch of things can be triggered off of a single event. So if you have a whole bunch of components that are all going to be acting off the same events, you can all attach them onto that one webhook receiver, and then they can all just do what they're supposed to do. So you can actually expand this single integration over time with more pieces to it as you want to make, more complex actions happen. Like you just take that original stack and you throw a populator onto it, and then boom, you get notifications on events, and it's actually going through and writing records back to, or updating records back on the JSS through the API. Oh, I'm going to OD a lot of dollars. All right. So, because, it gets better the more things you hook up, I decided to codename this thing Project Voltron. And we're gonna walk through what this looks like. It's a concept right now for a modular plugin architecture to Jamf Pro. So I got some videos here. This is what it looks like to you if you were to actually be walking through and firing off an integration using this. So we're in the serverless application repository, which is accessible through the Lambda portion of the AWS console. I'm just searching for Voltron. I want my webhook receiver. There we go. And then I have a few parameters that I get to actually specify. The receiver, when you launch it, will let you specify an access token or a username and password for HTTP-based auth, because the way the access token is going to work is whatever URL you get for your receiver, you add a question mark to the end of it, access token underscore, and then the token string that you set, and then it's sort of like an inline token. If you ever used the old HipChat APIs, they supported having the token right in the URL. Same concept. The alternative is if you actually want to use the basic authentication feature that's in Jamf Pro now, you can actually specify the username and password for this receiver right here, and then that's what you plug into the JSS, and it does basic authentication. So after a few moments here, we see that I fired off everything, and we now have a webhook receiver. And if we go in here, we can see that I got my URL. So all these things launch inside CloudFormation. Like the serverless application repository is doing a bunch of things transparently for you behind the scenes, but you can actually go access all these components. So when this is done, we go to the CloudFormation stack that it created, and in the outputs, I can see all the values that I need. There's actually a few things in here, like it's actually outputting the SNS topic as well, because in a moment here, we're going to slap some components onto this, and they're going to attach themselves to this. Now let's head over to Jamf Pro, and we're going to add a webhook, and we are going to add in that receiver that we just did. Give it a name, copy and paste magic, autofill disk magic, which I had to retype. Sending JSON because, we should all be using JSON. And there we go. Webhooks in there, and now as computers are being added into the JSS for the first time, Jamf Pro, as they are being added into Jamf Pro for the first time, it will be firing webhooks to the receiver, and then anything attached to the receiver will start doing stuff. So let's add something on there. Let's make it better. Yes, I am a fan of the new Voltron. So here we go. We are now going to add a Slack notification component onto that receiver. So we go down here. Never mind, we're going to add populator. We're not doing Slack. So in here, we have a bunch of stuff that we're going to add here. So we're saying what type of object we're doing here. We've got the there we go. That was the stack name from CloudFormation for what it launched, because it's going to actually be attaching to components from that first component, namely the SNS topic. Then we've got the domain, the password, the user, and then the name of the CSV file that we're going to dump into the S3 bucket it creates. So, Daniel, poor Daniel, had to suffer through this giganimous CSV file that he couldn't actually read or parse. There is actually a really fun feature in S3, which is called S3 Select, which allows you to perform SQL queries on JSON and CSV files. So if you actually dump a CSV file into an S3 bucket, you can query it like it's a SQL database.
I've already done the work.
The more you know. All right. So everything's done. Populator has now been launched. And inside that CSV file, I have a really simple one. We just have Keith's information in here. These all map to the fields in the computer record. So what happens is when the webhook event comes in, it's going to query based on the serial number in the CSV file, get all this information back, and then it will do a return put operation to Jamf Pro to fill in all those details. So I mean, I don't have any like fancy video about the whole process. Just trust me that it actually did what I said it did. But here we are. We can see that the asset tag got updated. And then if we go into the location information, we can see Keith's information has all been populated. And this is all in 10.8 now, so you're welcome. But you know what's not in 10.8? Slack. So let's add Slack. So we're just going to do the same thing. We're going to use the pre-existing receiver we already have that we're using with Populator. We're going to grab Slack notifications. We're going to go down here. When you're in Slack and you want to create an inbound webhook for a channel, they give you a URL. You just slap that URL right in here. We're attaching it to the webhook receiver stack just like we did with the other one. There is an option for ignoring events, so you can actually make this Slack component filter out specific events so that it only actually sends notifications for certain things in case you're blasting the receiver with a whole bunch of different types. This one's a lot simpler. It's really just deployed one thing, 3 things, 4 things. I should really just let the video play before I say anything. But this is all sped up too, but there we go. The Slack component is now deployed, and if this looks familiar, I pretty much just took the code right out of Jackalope and threw it into this. So there we have some really nicely formatted inbound webhook notifications to a Slack channel showing when computers were added, and I also threw computer check-in events added too. And if I want to send this to more channels, I can just fire off more Slack components onto that same webhook receiver. And the beautiful thing about serverless stacks in AWS is the big thing they love pitching about it is you only pay for what's being used. Things that are sitting there, you don't pay for. You don't pay for them just taking up space in your account. You pay for when they're actually being triggered and executed, and when they're operating. So I could have 100 different components floating around out there, and if they aren't all firing, I'm not paying for them. So this is actually here's the links for where I'm currently working on this. It's a conceptual item right now. I've been talking to AWS's product teams for the serverless application repository about some stuff to make it more user-friendly. Like you could see that there were fields in there that were showing up as plain text when they shouldn't, like password and token inputs. If you were actually taking the template straight from my GitHub repo and then launching it in CloudFormation, that will actually correctly not display those password fields and such, because what's happening is some of those privacy settings in CloudFormation are not being respected yet in the Service Application Repository. So before any of this stuff is actually searchable publicly in the SAR, I'm waiting for them to make those improvements. All the knowledge for building stuff like this is actually available both at the Serverless Application Repository link right there, where you can also browse what's out there, and the AWS Serverless Application model down below. And if Daniel will join me back up here, I think we got about 15 minutes of Q&A time.
Yeah, we've got some microphones up here for Q&A. I know anytime I spend time with Bryson, I walk away saying, what was he just talking about? And then
I don't even know what I talk about.
I've got 5,000 questions.
You just keep inviting me back up here.
Yeah. While we're waiting, if anybody does have questions, we referred to Webhooks Part 1 and Part 2. If you search JNUC webhooks in your favorite search engine, you will find the previous talks from 2016 and the 2017's Webhooks talk to kind of put all the efforts together and the work that you guys have been doing and the kind of different things and extensibility and the stuff that's there. So yeah, feel free to check that out if you're new to the Webhooks world. This is potentially further along than what you were expecting, not sure. But any questions from anybody for Bryson and Daniel?
Actually, I got a curiosity here. How many people here use Slack? That's a lot.
That's the whole room.
How many people use Microsoft Teams? Okay, so a component that I do have that's not on the repo yet is one for Microsoft Teams notifications from Jamf Pro. So you will get to play with that soon if you want to do it from the source code.
Does anyone want him to put the links back up? Yeah. Do you want to go back a slide?
Which links?
I think your ones.
We'll get yours from the recording.
Yeah.
This will be recorded. If anyone didn't get the pictures of stuff, we do have all the recordings, and we will be posting those. So we got a couple of people taking pictures. If we don't have questions, we'll keep this up. There is a
I think
question.
we have one question.
Look at that.
We have a brave soul here.
Yeah, the one who, yeah.
So it's more of a request. The question you just asked: who uses Slack? Who uses Microsoft Teams? Can I record that response for my
Of who
business?
uses Slack and who uses Teams?
Yeah.
There was about a 3-to-1 ratio there.
Yeah.
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 Just to
If
show
we can
my
do like
boss?
show of hands again, who's using Slack?
Oh, hold on.
Well, yeah.
We got to take a. Are you gonna take a selfie?
Oh,
of this?
he wants to.
No, yeah.
just
Just
a
like
video.
I think this is to prove to a certain. Yeah. Oh, I've been there. Yeah. So
Yeah.
who's using Slack? Are you
Hold on,
you're going to
I
record this?
think I'm
Film it.
uncomfortable with this now.
Who's using Slack? Still. We
Yeah.
got hands up. All right.
Who's using Teams? Who's using Teams that would like to use Slack? That's the exact same number. Yeah.
Hold on, for fairness, who's using WebEx Teams? Or Cisco Teams, whatever they call
What?
it.
Yeah. What is
now.
it called now? It was
I don't
Spark
know.
until WebEx
Is
Teams.
WebEx
Yep.
Teams?
Okay.
Okay.
Go-
Hang
Ooh.
out the chat.
Who's using HipChat?
Google Wave. We're using HipChat.
Yeah, we're using HipChat.
All right, we got some other HipChat users. Great. Thank you,
Awesome.
everybody, for coming. Let's give Daniel and Bryson a round of applause for the hard work they've been doing and sharing.
Yep.